A man was inspecting a train when he noticed something terrible. He realized that the train's brake lines were not connected. The man rushed to warn the driver not to start the train yet, but the driver thought they were just dispatching the train to a siding. He insisted on stopping the train before connecting the brakes, because he was in a hurry to get off work and have lunch. But when David started the train, he realized the track switching ahead was wrong. 20 years of dispatching experience told him it would take at least a while to stop the train now. His partner urges him to drive through and then back up again, but David didn't want to be late for dinner, so he made a smart decision.
I'm hopping out.
Do not get out of that cab, man.
Don't worry, I'll set the independent.
Do it.
Despite his partner's desperate pleas not to leave the driver's seat, he got out while the train was moving. He wanted to switch the tracks back before the train arrived. However, the obese man was unaware that the train's vibration had shifted the gear into full forward. While he was trying to maneuver the track in front of him, the train instantly lost control and began to pick up speed. This strange scene also made David dumbfounded. With 20 years of driving experience, David quickly realized the seriousness of the problem. He rushed after him to try to regain control of the train, but as soon as he touched the train, he tripped and fell to the ground. The train took on a rapid form, as if it had made up its mind. The workers nearby witnessed what had just happened, but instead of choosing to help, they mocked him unmercifully. Thus, an unmanned train was running at full speed against the flow of traffic, and so began a real-life disaster. David and the two men rushed to Lisa to explain the situation. Lisa was horrified when she found out what had happened. Not only were the brakes on the train not connected, but she had even left the driver's seat without permission. But David explained that he had set the brakes independently and that the train would not be traveling faster than 10 miles per hour. Knowing that the train wasn't traveling too fast, Lisa's heart dropped a little. After Lisa explained that they were going to chase the train with the service truck, she turned around and left. What Lisa didn't realize was that the train was traveling much faster than 10 miles per hour. Lisa then hurriedly ordered all the trains to get into the siding to avoid it. She also contacted the experienced Jed to stop the train. Although Lisa quickly arranged a plan to stop the train, but they didn't know the train's true speed. When Jed arrived at the stopping point, he didn't see the train. He waited for the two men who had caused the train to spin out of control. Apparently, the train had already passed by. Jed rushed to Lisa to report the situation. Lisa was devastated to learn that the train was traveling much faster than 10 miles an hour. She then took the first look at the train's cargo, but it was a train carrying dangerous explosives. It was carrying 8 cars of toxic materials and 5,000 gallons of diesel fuel, and the train was heading into a populated area. If something happens to the train, they'll all be the sinners of history. And what's even worse, a train full of children hadn't had time to get into a siding to avoid it. The runaway train was coming right at them. The innocent children were still happy and contented from their travels, unaware that death was beckoning them. But in the nick of time, the veteran driver managed to steer the train into the siding and avoided the runaway train without any danger. On the other side of the train, the two wrongdoers caught up with the train. The only way to stop the runaway train is to get back into the cab and regain control. But the train was already traveling at 80 miles an hour. With the cooperation of the two men, they managed to catch the train. But unfortunately, an obstacle suddenly appeared in front of them. They had to give up their chance. And the story soon became a national media sensation. The media were watching the runaway train live. In order to avoid disaster, Lisa diverted other trains away from the runaway train. At the same time, she contacted her superiors to tell them about her derailment plan, but they rejected it because derailment would mean they would lose everything on the train, and they'd have to pay a lot of money for it. It's too much property damage for the higher-ups, and the company's stock could plummet. Lisa didn't have a better idea, but soon enough, the higher-ups came up with a plan to deal with the situation. They decided to send a 5,000-ton front end to block the way. A driver would also be parachuted into the cab. The plan seemed highly feasible, but they underestimated the power of a 39-car train traveling 120 miles an hour. Could a small locomotive stop a train? Nevertheless, but a 30-year veteran driver still tried to stop it with the front of his car. And after a long crash, it did the trick. The speed of the train has been reduced, and that gives the airborne crew a chance. But they underestimated the inertia of the collision. The paratroopers had no time to react before they were thrown out. But the nightmare doesn't end there. The veteran driver continues to fend off the train. Just then, there's a siding ahead. He tried to bring the runaway train into the siding. It may be his only chance, but he underestimated the 10,000-ton train. In a single collision, the driver's car was derailed and overturned. The end result was the destruction of the train and the deaths of the men. The superior's plan also failed at this moment, and caused casualties. However, before the superior officers could catch their breath, another train came on the map that failed to enter the siding in time. The superior officer was also stunned. If the two trains had collided, he would have been responsible. Fortunately, the two trains met at the siding. Frank was able to steer his train into the siding to avoid the collision, but because Frank's train is so long, its rear end collides with the runaway train. Fortunately, the train did not derail. Just a second before the runaway train passed, Frank saw an opportunity in his tail. He sees that the train's rear connector is not closed. That means it's possible to connect to it. He offered to slow the train down by pushing in the opposite direction, so he immediately reported his plan to his superiors. But again, they rejected it, because they had a very elaborate derailment plan in place. They first evacuated the residents along the route. At the same time, They set up heavily armed police on the route of the runaway train to prepare for target shooting, and portable derailleurs were installed on the tracks. But Frank's 30 years of experience as a driver meant that this derailleur would be useless against a train of 10,000 tons. The only way to stop a train with this kind of power is to grab it by the tail and pull it in the opposite direction. But his partner, Will, is amazed. He thought Frank was just being a hero, and if it caused the train to derail and roll over, it would be the end of their careers. They could even be held criminally liable. But even so, Frank didn't stop preparing. 3 months earlier, he had been forced into early retirement by his superiors for no reason. His pension was cut in half. His future was not so important to him at the moment. He didn't do it for the company. He did it for his moral obligation. Perhaps moved by Frank's selflessness, Will also set out on the unknown road of rescue. And so, they chased the runaway train at full speed in their locomotive. But little did they know that they would be the saviors of this disaster. On the other side, the runaway train soon reached the point planned by their superiors. All the armed police were ready to aim at the red safety valve on the runaway train. At the command of the captain, they started hitting the safety valve, but they didn't hit it. They had to stop shooting because the valve was too close to the fuel tank. Luckily, there was a portable derailleur in front of them. When everyone was ready to take over the runaway train, the derailleur was crushed like tofu in front of the 10,000-ton train, just as Frank had predicted, and the plan of the higher-ups failed completely. And so the train continued on its high-speed journey to a populated area. And what's even more frightening, there's a fatal curve just a short distance away. The maximum speed through this curve is 15 miles an hour, and underneath the curve are oil tanks. If a train were to overturn here, this town of hundreds of thousands could be destroyed in an instant. And now, these two men are the center of attention. They must slow the train down before it enters the curve. If they can't, they'll die with the train, because they're chasing in reverse. Frank can't see the connection. At the risk of his own safety, Will went to the rear of the train to be Frank's eyes. But the first time they make the connection, something happens. The out-of-control car was instantly crushed. The grains of rice are scattered like a sandstorm, hitting Will in the eye. But soon Will realizes that the connection is not working. Will has no choice but to signal Frank to continue. With the two of them working closely together, the train was finally connected. But when Will tries to return to the cockpit, he realizes that the connector is not locked. The train could be disconnected at any moment. He reported the situation to Frank and then went down to manually unlock it. Will's efforts were successful, but his right foot was damaged. The pain was so severe that he slipped. He suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. People were watching the TV, lamenting the young man's life. Even Frank thought he might be dead. But to everyone's surprise, Will's physical strength kept him alive. He struggled to pull himself up, although Will survived. It seemed the nightmare had only just begun. Because of this, the dispatcher told them they had a mere 4 miles to go before the fatal turn. Time is of the essence. With Will briefly bandaged, Frank made his first attempt. Under the powerful brakes, the wheels went up in flames, but he managed to slow down to about 40 miles an hour. But due to the sheer tonnage of the runaway train, they're soon back up to 69. Frank knew in his heart of hearts that the brakes on the front of the train alone could not stop a runaway train. Just as Frank was falling into despair, Will gave him another boost of confidence.
What about the braking on the freight cars? Good.
Frank decisively relinquished the driver's seat to Will and ventured out to each car to apply the brakes manually. The whole country prayed for them, and that's how the train managed to get down to 25 miles an hour. But the safe speed through the curve is 15 miles. Obviously, it's not safe to go through at this speed, but then their brakes overheated and blew out, paralyzing them. The train's speed has increased again. What's even more frightening is that the train continues to approach the curve. Frank's 30 years of driving experience tells him that they have no choice but to activate the independent brakes. Though they knew there was little hope, they were at their wits' end. Just a second before the train enters the curve, Frank directs Will to pull the final safeguard. Miraculously, the train makes it through the curve. No derailment. It didn't roll over. Everyone is amazed. It's come through the curve without a hitch. But the danger isn't over. Frank rushes to the locomotive, but a new trial was to follow. The distance between the cars is like an unbridgeable chasm, blocking Frank's progress. The audience holds its breath. The train maintains its high speed as it makes its way across the railroad. And still, the train was destroying them all. Just as everyone was falling into despair, Jed caught up with them in his pickup truck. He came into view like a savior. In the heat of the moment, Will couldn't care less about the pain in his feet. He jumped onto the truck with a mighty leap. Then Jed ran to the front of the truck with Will in tow. Without hesitation, he jumped and grabbed the railing. With their combined efforts, they stopped the runaway train. There were cheers of triumph. The hearts of all the men had been hanging in the air.